Welcome to Thinking Outside the Soil with your host, Seany Alfalfaseed, where we get to talk story and touch on topics about hydroponics and the farmers who grow the crops and creatures we need to eat. Good morning, and happy Sunday from the farm. Thank you for being with me on another beautiful morning. Got some frost on the ground as the sun rises, and I love just seeing the mist rise up, and it just reminds me to appreciate the little things like the rising mist of the morning or the foggy days that we get on these changing temperatures. It also reminds me a little bit why I'm here and some of the things that I've been sharing with you on some of these Sundays these last few weeks. And I wanted to continue sharing the last of my journey these last couple weeks so that you could get to know me a little bit more and take you from where I was to where I am as of now, I guess I could say. I last left off on Sunday about my experience at the aquaponics source and working on a project with the team and finding a lot of value in the leadership from JD and Tanya Sawyer. And I ended up befriending my friend John, and I wanted to continue on with where I went from there for a little bit. So it was actually just after this experience that my life radically changed and I finally flowered into the person I am today so that I could give back what I've been given. But real quick, before I tell you about my experiences with jail for the last time, if you'd be so kind as to leave a review and let me know what you've enjoyed so far or why others should stick around as well. The last days of work at the aquaponics source were a struggle for me. I was struggling a lot with alcohol and I was drinking every night, showing up to work hungover, calling in because I couldn't even drive my car some days, so trying my best to remote in and do the work that I needed to do. This was 2017 in the spring, and I was struggling. Thankfully, I was aware enough to know that I needed help, and I was talking to everyone in my life and telling them that I had to do something different. I had to change. I had to make different choices. And during this time, I was going over and over this in my head and thinking about where's the best place for me to be. And so I started to look at inpatient treatment centers. I needed, or so I thought, to go to a place where I had to be inside, intensively monitored, treated, going through therapy in some sort. So I started looking at what were the available options for me. And at the time, I didn't have anything but some basic insurance. So my options were a little bit limited to what I could do. So I started looking for all the inexpensive avenues for treatment and started telling everybody, hey, I need to make a big change in my life. One of those people that I told was JD Sawyer, and we sat down and had a heart-to-heart, and it was very cathartic for me and for him. He shared a lot of his soul and some things that he hadn't shared with other people, and it was really neat to connect on another level. And he said to me, Sean, I love you, man. Go do what you need to do. Take care of you. And so I started to pursue that treatment options, And what did it mean for me? Well, serendipity has a way of stepping in and doing things in a way that we don't know. So, about a week or so after expressing my need to take time off from work to go to treatment, I went down to an Easter celebration in Colorado Springs with my father. And for me, this was the complete turning point in my life up until this moment. I was about 3 or 4 weeks sober, or rather, I hadn't had a drink for 3 or 4 weeks, and I was dry and thirsty. Didn't know it until I showed up at my grandfather's house. And when I greeted my aunt, the first thing I said to her was, "I'm thirsty." And she said, "Sean, well, that's great. We have Pepsi or water in the fridge." And I looked at her again, dead serious, and said, "No, I am thirsty." She knew what I meant, and we went and found the alcohol in the cupboards and made the strongest mixed drink that I could get away with without taking all of her alcohol. Throughout the night, I consumed every ounce of alcohol I could find in a house that was pretty much devoid of much booze. There was some wine, there was a few bottles of alcohol, and I ended up drinking it all and blaming most of it on my aunt at the time, who is also an alcoholic. So we both struggled, and she became my scapegoat, and I got absolutely smashed. And for me, I change from Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde most of the time when I consume alcohol. I tend to joke with people if they ask when I drink, and I reply, "No, I'm allergic to alcohol." And they say, "Oh, what does that look like? Do you know you react to it or anything like that?" And I go, "No, when I drink alcohol, I go to jail." And it's true. I was so drunk while at this Easter celebration that on the way home, while riding with my father, I decided it was best to pick a fight, and it became quite abusive from my end. And I was extremely mean and digging up things from the past when I was a kid concerning the divorce that we went through and blaming him for all of these things that were not true. Yet I was so angry at inherently myself and my inability to understand my own struggles that I was lashing out on my father. And I even at one point tried to run us off the road by grabbing the steering wheel while we were on the highway. And by the grace of that man, we somehow made it home in one piece. And I blacked out in bed, waking up the next day with this feeling of dread and absolute hate for my father. And it is impressive to me that today we get this opportunity and have the relationship that we do because of what I put him through while I was going through my alcoholic struggles. So he asked me to leave the house. I was staying with my father during this time of my life. And what did I do? I left the house to go to the liquor store instead and bought a bottle of Sauza tequila. I was a tequila drinker, and I drank an entire 750 milliliter of tequila, and somewhere in there, my brain lost all of its memory. And what I share with you from here on is a bit of a recollection from a police report and the stories from those who were of sound mind and body at the time. I remember waking up, seeing white concrete walls, looking down at my chest, and seeing orange hospital scrubs. I could hear the click of a radio, and somewhere in the background of the chatter, there was a voice on there asking for deputies to do something, followed by the metallic sound of a door opening and exposing this room full of others in orange standing around a desk with a man in a badge. And they brought me to this guy and said, "Can you tell me your name?" But before the words of my name came, I couldn't but help ask why I was there. And the deputy stared at me in the face and he said, "Mr. Short, you are here because you have 2 charges of attempted assault against Greeley police officers." Now, I don't know if any of you out there may understand the severity of hearing those words in that moment, but for me, my entire life left me, and I thought that life was over, and I was spending the rest of my life in prison. And for me, I could not foresee ever spending the rest of my life and in prison, and I thought that it was going to be the best decision to try to take my life. So that's what I tried to do. And in the act of that, I had this incredible moment and life-changing transformation where I found the desire to want to live again. And while I was staring at this moment in my life, something inside of me overwhelmingly said, "Sean, the first person who's going to get the call when you take your life is going to be your brother and family." And that completely broke me instantly. And I wept and snot dripped out of my face. And I was hiding myself under a blanket at the time. And in the moment of feeling this utter pain and pleasurable relief of understanding that my life was meant for more than what I could understand, I arose outside from this blanket in this weirdest motion. And I remember this man that was sitting next to me on a cot looked at me like I was crazy, and he said, "Are you okay, son?" And I looked right at him and I said, in the craziest words, "Do you know how Jesus meditated?" And he was like, what?" And I looked right back at him and said, "Yeah, I'm serious. Do you know how Jesus meditated? I need to figure this out." And he said to me, "I am Jewish. I don't actually know, but I do know a little bit about meditation." And for me, I didn't know if that was going to be good enough. So I flagged down the CO, the correctional officer, and asked him for a Bible. I got a King James Bible, and this guy and I started to search through the New Testament on scripture that showed how Jesus actually meditated. And for me, it was this weird moment of trying to search for something outside of myself to understand what it meant to be alive. And in that energy that I had, I knew that I went from this place of never wanting to live again to desiring to do anything to have a good life. And I said to myself, I will do whatever it takes to be a better man. I don't care if I have to spend the rest of it in prison, but I have to do whatever it takes to be a better me. I believe it was that conviction that radically transformed my journey and changed who I was in the past and transformed me into becoming who it is that I could be. It's strange that this new opportunity in my life came in the form of four walls and metal doors. Because I have found myself in this situation so many times in the past, I've joked that I've worn so many metal bracelets and had so many mugshots. And thankfully, this was the last mugshot that I received. My experience was getting incarcerated for some type of minor offense, usually related to not taking care of a ticket for a failure to appear. I would get arrested. I would call the bail bondsman. I would get bailed out of jail. I would call my mom. I would call my dad. Mom actually never really answered. I would call dad and I would get bailed out of jail. So my MO, my modus operandi was to instantly get out of jail. So it, in context, was incredibly different for me in this experience because I was unable to get a hold of any of those individuals while I was on the inside for these first few days. And while I was catastrophizing what it meant to spend the rest of my life incarcerated or possibly take my life, I was absolutely unaware or unsure how I even got to jail. I arrived in a blackout. The first memory I had was indeed of that white brick hallway, and I woke up with pain on the back of my head. My chest was in absolute pain. I even had a bruise on my chest, so I couldn't quite figure out what had actually happened. So when I had heard that I had received these charges against police, my mind started to fantasize, if you will, on what I did. And I used the evidence that I had at the time to say, I must have done something bad enough to where, I got injured and they had likely had to restrain me and possibly injured me in my attempt to not be detained while I was under the influence. It seemed very logical to me that it would happen, and there is a history in this area of that happening. When you are resisting arrest, you will quite often catch a charge for attempted assault. Now, I'm not saying those to not take the accountability away from my activity. However, I had only these little pieces of information and was unable to get anything else. So I found myself inside suicide watch for a good week's time before they transferred me to a maximum security unit where they put people with those types of charges. And as soon as I walk into the room, it was quite clear to me and the others in that pod that I was not meant to be there. You can see on the faces of others that I was not in the right place. And it's a little bit of a feeling thing, but it's also a recognition that I knew for me that I hadn't done anything previously so heinous to warrant myself to be around others like this who had committed alleged crimes of murder, of rape, of arson, of these things that we tend to put at the top of not good in society. And I was immediately approached by a guy who quickly saw I was a fish out of water and oriented me to the subtleties of being around felons. My escape in jail had always been chess. I loved to play chess, and so when there is that opportunity to play, I could. And it may not be quite clear, but while you are in jail, there is some type of free time, at least here in Weld County, and in other facilities I've been on along the Front Range, is there are games and a few simple board games where inmates can pass the time playing those different things with each other or individually. You can use cards to play solitaire, or spades is a very popular game aside from chess. And the other way that I would occupy my time when I would go to jail before this and during this time was to dive into the legal literature that was available. And it's quite limited at the jail that I spent the most time at, Weld County Jail. They are limited to a computer that is quite archaic. It has a simple touchscreen. The computer is housed in a cabinet the size of 2 file cabinets, and it is on wheels. They're able to wheel this computer throughout the jail to the different areas for inmate use. And so I knew about this legal resource from one of my early endeavors in jail and would request use of the legal library if I knew I was going to be inside longer than a few days, because for me, it was an opportunity to use my brain constructively. Now, while you're in jail, you are being scrutinized by everyone at every moment in time. You are being observed by the staff, by the correctional officers, by the cameras, the master controllers that are looking at the monitors. You are being observed by the other inmates. They are looking at what you do, and it's why as soon as you walk into a room, you can instantly see and feel this energy. They saw me requesting use of this legal library, they being the correctional officers, they being the inmates, and would strike up conversations with me quite often on what was I doing with that resource, what was I learning, and then they would quite often ask me questions that were related to things that were in their minds along the legal lines. If it was a correctional officer, they would tend to ask me about what I found. And if it was an inmate, they would tend to ask me if I could look up their charges and, for lack of better words, give them legal counsel. And I knew immediately that was something you should never do. However, I would often entertain those conversations and extract out what those people were trying to figure out, and then make some kind of offer and trade to say, well, I will look up this information and transcribe it for you so you can do some of your own interpretation and research in lieu for tea bags and food. I would trade their commissary for my services. And so it began a weird conscription service in jail. My hustle was to sell my scribe services. I actually would write letters and other things for inmates in exchange for food. I would actually drink a lot of tea late at night, so I would have the opportunity to write. For me, writing is therapeutic, and I dove into this time to write out my entire life story. I foresaw peril. I foresaw my future being in jail, and I wanted to get everything in my head onto paper before I went down some path or whatever. And I'm thankful the cellmate that I had was from another country and didn't speak much English, because we were able to sit in silence for most of our moments, and it allowed me to have space to process all of those experiences from the time I could remember up until that instant in jail. And I was able to just get out so many aspects of my past, so many emotions, things that I had never really truly knew that were inside of me. And I recognized this therapy through writing was so powerful that I eventually intend to curate some of those writings and make them into something that can somehow help others in those situations, others that have struggled with finding their purpose and find themselves inside of a jail cell. Well, it was a very slow process of coming to terms with what my future could look like should I be incarcerated for a length of time. And while I had originally rectified that I would do whatever it took, while sitting inside of a maximum security jail cell, life can look kind of pale at times, and it can get even worse when you realize that you still have no idea why you are in jail. The due process is a bit slower than we like to think, and it's much slower than popular medias like Law and Order seem to make us think. So while I was sitting in jail, it took me 30 days before I could get any discovery, any information about what it is that actually happened to me. So for 30 days, I was living in limbo about the actual circumstances of my arrival. I was mostly speculating about what was going on based on the evidence I was able to collect and the anecdotal information from the other inmates. The police report revealed to me a story which was quite unbelievable. Yet, when I put it in context of some of the other strange things that have occurred to me, it's actually quite normal in context of all of those things. Now, I've interpreted this police report multiple times over the past almost 6 years now, and it's become a bit of a narrative, and I will attempt to do my best to leave it as raw as I saw it in that moment. However, you must know that there's going to be some inherent bias from what's gone on since then and what I learned while I was experiencing these things. The police report began essentially that a local proprietor, a business owner of Baskin Robbins, observed an individual that was living under a tree of a park next to her business, and she called the Greeley police to do a well-being check. And so the police showed up, and when they found me under this tree, I was completely disheveled. My hair was everywhere. My pants were covered in my own bodily fluids. I didn't know my own name. I didn't know my age. I didn't know where I was. And the report recorded that I reeked of alcohol, and the officers were concerned, so they called the paramedics to come take me to the hospital. When the EMTs arrived to take care of me, I became combative when they attempted to put me into the hospital gurney. And I tried to bite the cops, kind of like Hannibal Lecter. I pulled their vest and made chomping sounds, and did that apparently several times, to the point where they had to put a bite spit mask on me, took me to the hospital, cleared me, and brought me to Weld County Jail. Then I learned that I was in the booking area and was absolutely out of control. I was yelling at other inmates and making some claims that I wasn't supposed to be where I was. And while I was inciting all of this action, another individual accosted me and told me to stop, and I tried to fight him. And I'm told from another inmate that witnessed this that this gentleman told me to sit down and shut up, and I wouldn't. And so he thumped me in the chest, knocked me backwards, and I hit my head on the concrete bench in the room. And at that time, the officers separated all of us out from each other and put this crazy man in its own cell, and I was not okay with that. So I started yelling and screaming in some drunken manner, and during that rant, I made a threat to take my own life. So they took all of my clothes, they put me in a different uniform, and then eventually I came to while walking down this hallway. I read this police report while sitting at a visitation table inside the jail cell across from my court-appointed attorney. And after reading this, I looked up to her and said, "Wow." And she said, "Yeah, I know." And so I pulled out my notes that I had been taking over the past month and said, okay, this is what I understand about my charges. And I went through all of the different case studies that I had uncovered through my limited research while inside, and showed her. I said, look, this is the case I think that we can build to, move me forward. I believe that while I understand I was under the influence, I think that there could be some subtleties in the way that I was treated, and I think that we can mitigate this differently. And she completely agreed with me and looked at me and said, wow, you've done a tremendous amount of research, and I shall do my best to look into what it is that you've given to me, and we'll go ahead and move forward and proceed as best we can be. I spent my days after that writing letters for other inmates, playing chess, and eventually was reclassified from maximum security to minimum security, meaning I was considered less of a threat, even though my charges were what they were. They understood that I was trying to do things seemingly for myself that were going to keep me in line with their expectations of what it meant to be a good inmate. And in that reclassification, what they do is they take you from a they took me rather from a maximum security unit, which means that you are in a unit, a room with multiple cells, and all of these cells have 2 inmates, and these cells are individually locking doors. And at the time, we were on a 23-hour lockdown most of the time. There were some rotationals where we were out of our cell for like 8 hours of the day and in the cell for the rest. And so that situation changes from being in a more confined, restrictive environment to a room of more people, and you share a cell with more roommates, and your door doesn't actually individually lock. Only the larger housing unit, or the pod, if you will, locks from the other units. And so this is considered a general population or a minimum security housing unit. And inside there, you have a bit more privileges, if you will. Now, in jail, one of the things that I had observed through my multiple trips and through this awakening was that there was a lack of resources for anyone that wanted to recover from addiction, that anyone that wanted to recover from substance abuse. So for me specifically, alcohol or any kind of treatment options within the jail, they're extremely limited. Their resources are limited. There are a couple programs at our local jail that are able to offer some mental health support. There's a program called the Jail-Based Behavioral Services, which is an entity that works with one of the local mental health organizations and the jail to be able to provide some level of mental health support while inmates are inside and seeking a transitional plan for when they leave jail to continue to have support. And one of the challenges with this program is they only have a few counselors, and it's a voluntary program. Meaning, if you're an inmate, you have to ask for this assistance, and there is very little information that this program even exists. So as an inmate, it took me multiple trips before I even knew that this was there. And to me, I have a big problem that I had to go to jail a bunch of times before I knew that a jail could offer help to not come back to jail. So for me, I got to see some of these things inside, and in the maximum security unit, you are not able to access those things at the same levels you are as the general population. And when I went to the general population, I began my best to gain access to those resources, and those individuals were actually extremely supportive and incremental into my ability to see how to structure my life in a way to not go back and repeat the patterns that have caused me to find the same failures. One of those things for me that helped me shift my perspective and aligned with that statement, I'll do anything that it takes to become a better man, was an outside individual who brought the program of Alcoholics Anonymous into the jail. And for me, what that showed was that there was another path that I had yet to explore. The message I continually heard from week to week was, whatever it is you do when you leave here, seek out support immediately. And for me, it was seeking out that individual program, and I leaned a lot into it and discovered that it's actually quite different than it's portrayed in the popular media. And there's a lot of really simple spiritual principles that are embedded that are actually transcend almost all of the things that were taught from the other religions and leaders around the world. But that is all I'm going to share with us today on the Sunday. If you've enjoyed what you've heard so far, please be sure to leave me a review. And if you're interested in knowing more about how hydroponics can help farmers save water, improve livestock quality, and become better stewards, head on over to thinkingoutsidethesoil.com and get yourself a copy of my book. You'll get the opportunity to read some of these little stories that you may have heard in the show, and you'll know that you won't be missing out on becoming part of the next agricultural revolution. Join us again tomorrow, and thank you for being with me on another episode of Thinking Outside the Soil. Take care and have a lovely day. Hey, before you go, check out the links below, and if you'd be so kind as to leave a rating and review and follow the show. For those with feathered friends, don't forget to get yourself some of our Blooming Health Farms Chicken Blend Sprouting Mix. This supplemental mix has been shown to give you some of the best eggs with the yummiest yolks. You'll have happy, healthy hens that abandon the feeder and give you eggs with high levels of vitamin A and omega fatty acids. So don't forget to get yourself some Blooming Health Farms Chicken Blend Sprouting Mix.